Chapter 8. Here the diary is interrupted. A number of the center pages have been torn away, and the next page begins on November 6th. Summer has passed, and somewhere in the missing pages of the diary, on September 23rd to be exact, autumn had begun. The corn has now been cut and shocked, grain has been thrashed, all the hay is stacked, and the labors of summer are over. At this time of year, all nature calls out from the woodlots. Near the farm buildings, the landscape becomes dotted with special apples like the Rambo, Maiden Blush, and Carolina Sweet. Off on the upper hillside, rennets and Virginia crabs and Cooper russets show themselves on the thinning orchard limbs. The insect chorus has reached its crescendo in the tall oatmeal-colored grass that was green only yesterday. The Blake mill now has been put together, and we find Isaac and Noah getting a shingle roof over it in time to protect the intricate wooden machinery from the late autumn rains. The full moon of November 6, 1805. 6th. Father and I have the mill roof all but shingled. It is fun working at night, but the weather is most cold. This moon is brighter than the harvest moon, said Isaac, and that is because of the crisper, colder air. It is even brighter than last month's hunter's moon, I think. Why do they call it the hunter's moon? Asked Noah. I suppose because it occurs at the right time to light the forest during the good hunting season. Though gentle people like us, who seldom use the gun, usually refer to it as the worker's moon. That is because it is the best time to do outdoor farm work at night before the cold sets in. Well, said Noah, the cold has certainly set in with this full moon. Isn't this our second heavy frost of the year? That it is, replied Isaac as he pushed another pack of shingles toward his son and stopped to rub his hands together in the cold night air. They say that sham summer, or Indian summer, begins right after the first frost, and that was during the last full moon. It looks like winter is nearing and most upon us. Just then there was a call from the direction of the house, from Rachel. Time for a warm drink, men. Come down from that roof before you catch your deaths. It is near midnight. Over a cup of steaming sassafras tea and a plate of cornbread, Noah and Isaac felt the satisfaction of having done a good day's work. I can't see why you must work on a slanting roof at night, said Rachel. Just because the almanac says it's the best time for shingling. It sounds silly and dangerous to me. Oh, come now, said Isaac. We are not as superstitious as all that. We just work best in the cold of the evening, and shingles left to dry out their first time in the heat of midday are apt to curl. There are a lot of moon lore sayings full of common sense, and there are a lot full of hearsay and nonsense too. Well, I think we should sort them out and not bring up a son on anything but knowledge and good sense. Noah laughed, but he had no retort. He was comfortably tired, and the hearth was warming him to sleep. It had been a good day and a good night. When he went to his room and blew out the candle, the moon lit the room so well that he looked about for a second or so, seeking another candle to blow out. And when he drew the covers up to make a tent to build up body warmth, the moon danced a silly dance through the bubbles of his window pane. From here to here is the period of most light for cross-country travel or for farm work at night. Waxing, full, very best, caution, waning. Season for above ground for planting or harvesting, also for transplanting, firewood, grafting. Season for underground crops for planting or harvesting, also for shingling, cutting timber, fruit picking. What a pleasure it is, he thought, to spice the world with things like moon lore and weather lore. The moon is an exact timepiece that will never change, and the seasons will always be with us, yet not to be sure about tomorrow's weather is more of a joy than a worry, and to wonder about the moon in an unending pleasure of life. If ever man should find his way there and learn everything about the moon, would the loss be greater than the accomplishment? It was a profound thought to go to sleep on. 7th. Finish the mill roof in time for a rain. 8th. Windy and chilly weather, closing in the open places with strips. 9th. Spent the day closing in the mill. 10th. Sunday. Robert Adams will come over tomorrow to help us with the apples. 11th. Spent the day gathering apples. Robert stayed over. 12th. More work in the orchard. 13th. Gathered cider apples. Will drive them to the village tomorrow and deliver Robert to his home. Shall dinner with the Adams and Sarah. The Blake orchards were a scattering of trees rather than a set plot, for Isaac wanted to first grow trees of special fruits before he transplanted seedlings into a pattern orchard. The cider apples were of a dwarf type known as crab. A crab apple in Noah's time was not like the crab apple of today, as the word crab merely meant it was a wild variety. The eating apples were known as russet, golden, ribston, and Normandy. All the eating apples of 1805 were pippins because they were raised from a pip, or apple seed, although now we think of a pippin as just one kind of apple. It seems a pity nowadays that the American apple tree has lost much favor as a useful landscape tree. For a full century, the early American worked at cultivating apple trees, and you can still see the evidences wherever the landscape has not been developed and improved. Walking through any wooded area, you will come upon a few ancient apple trees, and they will always mark the place where a farmhouse once stood. If children in this country made the effort of starting orchards, even one tree to each child, what an interesting project it would be, and what a contribution it would be to the nation. Where a farmhouse once stood. Robert Adams and Noah Blake first picked the eating apples. These were picked very carefully from the stem, using cotton gloves or without using the hands. The least pulling or squeezing, according to old ways, rendered the apple unfit for whole winter storage. These apples were put stem up in a straw-packed box and taken into the cellar as soon as frost threatened them. There they were put on stone, very often native marble, shelves. Wood shelves were never used. One apple was never allowed to touch another while in storage. Mr. Green's cider mill was small but modern. There was a grinding mill and a pumice press. Oak axle, fresh apples. Apples were crushed into pumice and exposed to air for about 12 hours. This was known as cheese ready for the press. Apple cheese was then sandwiched between some 20 layers of straw in a slatted crib. Adjustable iron pin, first oak lever, a log, cheese and straw in alternate layers, crib, second oak lever. Stones turned by water wheel or horse, these runners turned on a chase. 200 pounds pressed over 10,000 pounds weight. Cider. When all the prime eating apples were taken care of, the apples for drying were picked. Then last of all, the apples which had fallen and few poor apples still left on the tree. These were doomed to decay before long, so they were used for applesauce and for vinegar. One may see why there was a law against cutting down apple trees in the earliest American days, for the one tree provided raw fruit, cider for drinking, applesauce, dried fruit, and vinegar. Early apple trees were trained to grow low, so pickers did not always use ladders. But in New England, there was once a chair ladder that could either be stood upon or climbed, and was light enough to carry about. These were rough farm devices, so there are very few left to be found. They were nothing like the well-made ladder chair, which was a piece of indoor furniture. It has been said, however, that the ladder chair might have been designed from the chair ladder device. The author who collected ladder chairs was intrigued with the frequent burns he found on the backs of such chairs. Not until he visited a backwoods home in New Hampshire and saw someone using a ladder chair as an adjustable candle rack did he solve the mystery. This also explains the reason for the projecting lip on many old candlesticks, which hitherto was thought to be simply a handle for carrying it. 14th. Bang drove a great load of apples to Mr. Green's cider mill. Bang is lighter than Daniel, and I fear we shall need a drag shoe for the wagon. Had dinner at the Adams. Sarah had a letter from her home in Pennsylvania. Her parents wish her to return. The drag shoe or ruggle is an obsolete piece of wagon hardware that few people know about today. It was hung in front of the rear wheels, and when, in going downhill, a heavy load threatened to roll forward and push the horse over, the iron shoe was slid under the wheel, one wheel or both rear wheels. Then the back part of the wagon became a sled, and the horse actually pulled the load downhill. This, of course, was before the addition of wheel brakes to wagons. The drag shoe was released on going down a steep hill with a very heavy load, 2-hand lever, and the wheel ran right up onto the shoe. 15th. Stayed over at the Adams house to work the same amount of time that Robert worked helping me. 16th. Finished at the Adams and returned home. 18th. Sunday. Mother had begun apple drying yesterday. I hope Sarah does not go home. It is interesting to note that Robert first helped the Blakes, and then Noah helped the Adamses. This was a custom practiced religiously in the early farm days. When there was a job that took more than one person, a group of people did the work, not for pay, but to get that same kind of job done for themselves later. In that way, there was no hiring of help. For example, when a harvest mowing job was ready, some 8 men showed up at the designated farm and did the whole job in one day. Then each of the 8 men was entitled to the same service on his own farm. Food and switchel, or drinks, were the obligation of the farmer whose land was being worked. For a farmer to hire help to raise a barn or frame a house was unheard of. Cooperative labor was the answer. Apple drying is a practice long forgotten. Yet you may take almost any fruit nowadays and dry it into slices that can be eaten raw or sugared. It is still a good way to make apples keep into the winter. You may often see hooks in the ceiling beams near the fireplaces of old houses. They were used for hanging a long tray of apple slices where the heat of the fire could effectively dry them out, and seldom were the drying trays empty. These same hooks were the one which held a tent of blankets around the fire to house the Saturday night bather. 19th. A day of high winds. Father believes that many nuts have fallen from the woodlot trees, and he suggests that we gather them before the squirrels do. 20th. Went to the woodlot with Bang and wheeled in several logs we had left to season for flooring. Father will try out the new sawmill with them. 21st. Our first log was cut today. Father says he will save the centerpiece for our harvest table. The noise was so loud that Mr. Adams heard it and came over to see. Mother and Father were pleased with the saw, but Father says the wheel ratio must be changed. I asked Mr. Adams to send Robert over tomorrow for nutting. 22nd. Robert and I spent the day nutting. We gathered 4 baskets of chestnuts and about half as many walnuts. 23rd. Gathered almost twice the amount today as yesterday. Our hands are dyed dark brown from the nut juice. 24th. Sunday. Went to meeting. Sarah was amused with my stained hands, which will not clean. I told her that I hope she does not return home. 25th. Father cut several boards for the new floor, but I had a great disappointment, for I thought we would have the wood floor this year. Father says the boards must season for nearly 1 year. Mother is disappointed too, but she is accustomed to the dirt floor and wants it for one more Christmas. 26th. Mr. Green came out with 4 barrels of cider that he had pressed from our apples. The barrels are from Mr. Miner, and I think I recognize some of the hoop pole material that Robert and I sold to him. 27th. Father is making a smaller pinion wheel for the saw machinery. Boring through white oak must have taken a great deal of strength, yet there never seemed to be much complaint from the old-time builders. When you think that the pointed screw was not thought of until the mid-1800s, it seems remarkable that metal bits could be made to bore through the toughness of seasoned oak. The drawing shows a smith's beam drill such as Isaac Blake must have used in his shop. With such a contrivance, you could put more weight on the drill than the complete weight of your body. Below you may see some of the bits used a century or more ago with the beam drill. Bits of this type can be bought for use with electric drill sets. They are called new high-speed bits, but Noah Blake knew them well. Although wooden gear wheels, like those in the machinery of old watermills, were not perfectly made, they became perfect through actual wear. Isaac bores a new gear wheel from an oak disc. Slotted guide. Brace turned by hand under pressure of weight, 60 pounds. A smith's beam drill. Center bits, where the horizontal blade turns around the center of a central pin. This cuts the circle as the bit revolves. Blade. The first twist bit had a center bit head. Before very long, a set of noisy gears would wear themselves into smoothness and quietness, which is something metal gears will not do. 28th. Snow, the first white of the year. We are looking to the sleds, which are in sad repair. 30th. Spent the day in the mill helping Father.